In a landmark decision that will be studied for years to come, the Supreme Court has struck down President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs, dismantling the very core of his trade policy and sending shockwaves through the political and economic landscape. The ruling, delivered on October 1, 2025, ends years of economic uncertainty and marks a major check on presidential authority, setting a precedent that will shape future administrations. Across the nation, importers and retailers celebrated, hoping for long-awaited relief from high costs that have burdened businesses and consumers alike, and looking forward to a more stable marketplace. Industry groups hailed the decision as a victory for free trade and the rule of law, emphasizing that open markets are essential for American competitiveness and innovation. Meanwhile, the White House and Trump's supporters condemned the ruling, arguing the tariffs were vital for protecting American jobs and industries from unfair foreign competition. Domestic industries that benefited from the tariffs now fear a flood of cheaper foreign goods, raising concerns about layoffs and plant closures in key manufacturing regions. The timing of the decision surprised many, as the court acted before scheduled oral arguments, signaling a strong consensus among the justices and a sense of urgency to resolve the issue. The justices made clear the president had overstepped the authority granted by Congress, reaffirming the constitutional balance of power between the branches of government. This ruling not only shakes the foundations of Trump's trade policy, but also redraws the boundaries of executive power for future presidents, sending a message that no leader is above the law. The nation is left divided, with both relief and outrage echoing from Washington to factory floors, as Americans grapple with the far-reaching consequences of the court's decision. The era of Trump's tariff empire has come to a dramatic close, leaving the country at a crossroads and the world watching what comes next. President Trump, self-proclaimed tariff man, made import taxes central to his economic agenda, aiming to correct what he saw as decades of unfair trade. He invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, IEEPA, a law meant for true national emergencies, to justify broad tariffs on allies and adversaries alike. This unprecedented move redefined trade deficits as a national emergency, allowing the administration to bypass Congress and act unilaterally. Tariffs were imposed on hundreds of billions in goods, from Chinese electronics to European wines. Businesses faced unpredictable costs, and global supply chains were thrown into turmoil. Trump's strategy transformed a foreign policy tool into a weapon of economic protectionism. The result: a bold, disruptive shift in U.S. trade policy, setting the stage for a constitutional showdown. The legal and economic consequences would soon reverberate nationwide. The legal fight against Trump's tariffs was led by small and medium-sized American businesses, not corporate giants. These business owners, already facing tough competition and economic uncertainty, felt the tariffs threatened their survival and livelihoods. They banded together, determined to challenge what they saw as an overreach of executive authority. They argued the president had exceeded his authority, as the Constitution reserves the power to tax for Congress. This fundamental principle, they insisted, was designed to prevent any one branch from wielding too much power over the nation's economy. Plaintiffs claimed IEEPA was never meant to let the president impose broad tariffs. Regulation is not taxation. They pointed out that Congress had always maintained the power to set tariffs and taxes, and that this distinction was crucial to the balance of power. They challenged the idea that trade deficits qualify as a national emergency, calling it a misuse of emergency powers. Critics warned that stretching the definition of emergency could set a dangerous precedent for future presidents. Trade deficits, they argued, are long-standing economic realities, not sudden crises. These imbalances, they said, reflect complex global trends, not emergencies that justify bypassing Congress. Lower courts largely agreed, ruling the tariffs illegal and setting up a Supreme Court showdown. The legal battle quickly became a national story, drawing attention from lawmakers, legal scholars, and the public. At stake was more than money. It was a fundamental question of separation of powers. The outcome would determine whether the checks and balances at the heart of American democracy would hold firm. If the president could declare any economic issue an emergency, Congress's authority would be meaningless. The very structure of government and the limits of executive power hung in the balance. The battle became a defining test of executive power in economic policy. It was a moment that would shape the relationship between the branches of government for years to come. The Supreme Court's decision would set a precedent for generations, influencing how future presidents and Congresses would navigate the boundaries of their constitutional powers. The Trump administration defended its tariffs by arguing IEEPA gave the president broad discretion to define emergencies. They claimed persistent trade deficits threatened national security, justifying sweeping tariffs as economic self-defense. The administration insisted tariffs were a form of regulation, not taxation, and that courts should defer to presidential judgment. But the Supreme Court was unconvinced. The justices rejected the idea that a chronic trade deficit is an unusual and extraordinary threat. They ruled the administration had stretched IEEPA far beyond its intent, turning a crisis tool into a license for protectionism. The court's decision drew a clear line. Emergency powers cannot be used to bypass Congress for long-term economic issues. The president's broad interpretation of IEEPA was firmly rebuked. The Supreme Court's ruling was anchored in the major questions doctrine. Major economic decisions require clear congressional authorization. The court found no such authority in IEEPA for the president to impose sweeping tariffs. The justices affirmed that only Congress can levy taxes and that regulate does not mean tax. Declaring a decades-old trade deficit an emergency, they said, would let presidents bypass Congress on almost any issue. The decision reinforces the court's recent trend of limiting executive overreach, regardless of which party holds the White House. The Supreme Court's decision immediately cancels Trump's IEEPA tariffs, including those on Chinese goods and European imports. For consumers, this means lower prices on electronics, furniture, and groceries as businesses pass on savings. Importers and manufacturers see costs drop, boosting competitiveness and profitability. However, domestic industries once shielded by tariffs now face renewed foreign competition. The sudden change will ripple through global supply chains, with importers rushing to capitalize on the new landscape. Some companies may reverse costly supply chain shifts made to avoid tariffs. The ruling ushers in a period of adjustment, as businesses and consumers adapt to a dramatically altered trade environment. The economic aftershocks will be felt worldwide. Even as the IEEPA tariffs fell, the Trump administration pivoted to Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act, using national security as a new justification for tariffs. This law gives the president broad power to impose tariffs if imports threaten national security, a much harder target for legal challenges. The administration quickly launched new investigations and imposed tariffs on goods like semiconductors, lumber, and cars. Section 232 tariffs are more targeted and likely to endure, affecting a wide range of imports. For businesses and consumers, this means some prices may fall, but others, especially on cars and machinery, could rise. The era of high tariffs is far from over. The battleground has simply shifted. The Supreme Court's decision forces a realignment for U.S. businesses, consumers, and global partners. This landmark ruling marks a turning point, compelling companies and policymakers to rethink their strategies in a rapidly shifting landscape. The ripple effects are being felt across boardrooms, shop floors, and diplomatic circles alike. While some tariffs vanish, Section 232's national security tariffs create new uncertainty and potential price hikes. Industries that once relied on predictable trade rules now face a patchwork of regulations, and businesses must adapt quickly to stay competitive. The cost of raw materials and finished goods could fluctuate, impacting everything from manufacturing to retail. Consumers may see relief on some goods, but higher costs on others. Everyday items might become more affordable, while products tied to protected industries could get pricier. Families will need to navigate these changes as they manage their household budgets. Globally, the ruling is welcomed by some allies, but may provoke new trade tensions as the U.S. leans on national security justifications. International partners are watching closely, weighing their own responses and considering how to protect their interests in this new era of American trade policy. The trade war hasn't ended. It's changed form, with Congress reasserting its role in trade and taxation. Lawmakers are now at the center of the debate, tasked with crafting policies that balance economic growth, national security, and global cooperation. The decision sets a powerful precedent. Future presidents can't unilaterally impose tariffs by declaring long-term economic issues emergencies. This limits executive power and restores a crucial check and balance, ensuring that major trade decisions require broader consensus. The biggest battles over trade policy must now be fought in Congress, not by executive fiat. This shift means more public debate, more negotiation, and a greater role for elected representatives in shaping America's economic future. The debate over protectionism versus free trade will continue, but the rules of engagement have been rewritten. Experts, activists, and business leaders will all have a voice as the nation charts a new course in global commerce. The balance of power in Washington and the world of global trade has been fundamentally altered. As the dust settles, the world watches to see how America's new approach will shape the future of international trade and economic leadership.